Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Fresh Out the Podcast. I am one of three. I'm Jahan. People like me sometimes, not always, though.
Yeah, that's a great review. It's me, Casualty CDG, and I follow you on Twitter. This is my first time podcasting, and I am happy to have been invited by the fine guys here at Fresh Podcast.
That's actually pretty crazy that it's your 59th time of first time podcasting. As this is episode 59 of
Well,
Fresh
it's
Out
actually
Podcast.
it's actually you. It's my first time doing a 59th episode, actually.
Oh,
Fair.
makes way more sense.
That's fair.
I am your professional media and movie mastermind at the Funhouse, Drew Munhausen. As we said, episode 59, Fresh Out the Podcast. And we are actually, we usually record on Saturdays, and we are here on a Sunday evening after we're all fresh off of watching the premiere of House of the Dragon, the new Game of Thrones spin-off series. We're going to talk about that, but first, to lead in, it seems like an absolute lifetime ago that we did our podcast. I think it had to be back in November of 2021, so not that long ago, but back when Wheel of Time series came out.
Yeah.
And if you all remember, we did an episode kind of about like the next big fantasy thing, and at the time, we were talking Wheel of Time, thinking maybe, was that the thing to fill that void? And in hindsight, I feel like we're the only ones that really talked about that show in the universe. Of course, that's an exaggeration, but that show I don't think was the cultural phenomenon that I at the time thought it maybe could be.
I agree.
Especially
I
compared to
thought
Game
that
of Thrones.
show was going to be like a huge cultural phenomenon. It appeared that it wasn't, but it did get approved for what, 2 more seasons, right? So there will be three
Yes.
altogether. So at least they're keeping their eggs in the basket. You have to do that for a fantasy show. If you want it to pan out, one season will never do.
Yeah, it is. It is coming back. I thought it was really good too.
I was gonna say I
Uh,
didn't mean to make that sound like that it wasn't good, because that's
Yeah.
not the case. And I didn't want to take the wind out of your sails,
It,
John, because I
it
know
had.
you really like that show.
So like it was definitely pretty good. It wasn't the greatest thing ever. I like the mythology. I like what's going on more necessarily than the how the show came out maybe. But
Well, yeah, and that's fine.
That's
But
fine.
I think that now, here we are with the House of the Dragon premiere, and already within 2 hours of it premiering, I have had a lot of friends already texting, being like, "Yeah, I already watched this," or people chatting online on Twitter. It's like this is the topic of conversation, and it's kind of interesting to be back in that space since we're a few years removed from the Game of Thrones finale. Of course, worth noting that I believe around a week and a half from now is when the Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power series premieres on Amazon. It's going to drop with 2 episodes on a Thursday night. I think either the first of September, maybe. The first. So there you go. So we've got that on the horizon. But for now, let's dig into House of the Dragon. I think that's what people are here to listen to and to hear about. And it was an hour 6-minute premiere. I had seen some of the trailers, but really hadn't paid much attention to what the plot was really going to be. I just knew this was the Targaryen prequel series. Opened up with the title card that this is 172 years, I believe, before Daenerys Targaryen was born. So first off, before we get into the nitty-gritty details of what we liked, what we didn't like, where we're at, what were your general thoughts? Did y'all like the premiere?
yeah. So my general thought. So I had a hell of a time watching it, but once it got going, finally, yeah, I liked it. It opens up strong with. It's not a spoiler to say it opens up. There's a dragon. Instead of having to wait 4 or 5 seasons to see a goddamn dragon, right off the bat, it gives you that little bit. And this show's dope, man. It's got all the flavor that you want. Blood, guts, sex, and violence. Yeah, it's Game of Thrones.
Maybe even a dismembered man's genitalia.
Spoiler alert: dismembered peen.
Maybe. It's a huge maybe. Um,
Oh, bye, Gary. Gary left.
Gary just dropped, but he will be back on here shortly. So in the meantime, oh,
Sorry about that. That was a technical difficulty on my side.
that's okay.
So I'm with you, Drew. I didn't know a lot about it. I just knew there was another Game of Thrones show coming. I wasn't excited for it. I wasn't not excited for it. I'm not mad or happy. I didn't really want more Game of Thrones. I haven't rewatched any of the original stuff. I played like some of the Telltale Game of Thrones video game when it came out. I was on board. I watched all the seasons. I liked the content. But I'm happy that it ended. I'm not happy how it ended. I'm happy that it was over. It didn't keep going. Maybe it ended on a sour note, but it didn't just keep going until it was unwatchable. It stopped. And I like that. So this scares me that it's just going to keep going until it gets bad now. But that's not what happened after watching the first episode. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I had some low expectations, maybe. But I was like, once it's kicked off, I was like, bro, this is totally watchable. And the production quality is definitely great. They definitely paid for some expensive CG this time around, where it felt like last time they they almost spent all their CG on the dragons. Like the more the show went on, the better the dragons looked and the less fighting you got. This show, huge aerial shots of the city, huge dragon shots, just all kinds of just putting you right back into Westeros. They did a great job reestablishing King's Landing. With some really cool shots. I liked it, man. I give it a big thumbs up on this episode.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice that a prequel series, like you always worry with prequels and like spin-offs and all that kind of thing, that it's just going to be standing on the shoulders of the main show, blah, blah, blah. This show stands alone, in my opinion. Like, you don't need to have watched Game of Thrones, honestly. You don't need to. You're rewarded for having seen it with, like, bits and pieces. But it's all completely unnecessary in this show. So far, I think it could stand up on its own.
Agree with pretty much everything y'all have said. I thought the look and everything. I guess watching the first episode, and as soon as it started playing out, and I was learning about these characters and everything, it reminded me of what I liked about Game of Thrones when it first started. And you're learning the characters, and you're learning this world, and you're learning the dynamics between them all, and how Game of Thrones can be at its best. And the early seasons of Game of Thrones were so good at setting up the story and world, and the pacing was so great. And that's what really didn't work about those latter seasons when they strayed from the books, is the pacing just kind of got all out of whack when everything felt rushed. So I think that I'm hoping that they've learned those lessons, but just seeing how this started in the introduction, I thought it was pretty fantastic. Actually, I was much higher on this than I expected to be for a premiere. And especially, it's like all the things that I liked about Game of Thrones, like people sitting around tables and plotting and talking. Like, I like that shit. I like King's Landing, and the King's Landing stuff in Game of Thrones was always, to me, some of the better stuff. So now we've got a show that seems completely dedicated to that, and the early plotting, and we're far enough removed from Game of Thrones itself that there's still enough room to maneuver where we're learning these new characters that you can get invested in, and we don't know what their fates are. It'd be one thing if this was like a year before Game of Thrones started and you didn't know where things are going to go. This is far enough removed where there's a lot of new to really, I think, sink your teeth into. So I was very high on the premiere, and y'all already commented on it, but it looked great. The production values were incredible, which, I mean, of course, they know that this is their prized pig, I think, from HBO standpoint, so they're going to put everything they have into it. But, I mean...
The costumes just look phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. And then, yeah, well, so I think those are general thoughts. So yeah, it sounds like obviously we're all very high on it, so we can, or at least maybe I'm speaking for myself. I'm very high on it. Y'all are at least high on it.
I was also very high on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch more for sure. I'll watch the whole season, and at this rate, if the whole season's like this, then we're in for a good ride. To kind of echo some of the stuff you had said, I think there's some stuff that really makes Game of Thrones a Game of Thrones experience, right? I know it's kind of stupid to say, but there's things that set it apart from other fantasy settings, and just other different settings in general, and that is King's Landing is one, the Hand of the King, the Council, and if you don't have that, then I'm not sure it would feel like Game of Thrones. It would just feel like a thing in Westeros. So you're right, they hit on that, and they have all these interesting dynamic characters. They all have history with each other. Some like or don't like each other, and then some you just don't know a whole lot about yet. Like the guy who's married to the queen that should have been. We don't know a whole lot about him yet. And I'm really interested to see how his story unfolds, because he's definitely got some stuff up his sleeve. And that's what you want from Game of Thrones, right? Is there's mystery, there's intrigue, and then by the end of the first episode, like you were saying, this is almost 200 years before, so we don't know what's going to happen. All we know is that Targaryens will be in the seat, right? But now, even by the end of the first episode, you've got like 3.5 players aiming for the Targaryen seat. And so it's got all the Game of Thrones stuff you want. You don't know who's going to win. You don't know who's going to get the throne. You've got the violence going on in the city. I'm so in. I'm totally invested. They crushed it. It checks all the boxes to be Game of Thrones.
And you touched on something talking about your little description there. The hard part now about starting a new series, because if you remember when Game of Thrones first started, it was hard to get to wrap your head around who the characters were and their names. And there's probably, even now in our discussion of it, there's probably going to be a lot of, oh, that guy who did this and this one guy, because I definitely don't know all their names yet. I do have a list of the actors and everything in front of me, so I can kind of refer to them, but it's tough. There's there's the king, and then the king's daughter, and the king's brother, and then there's the queen's or the king's sister, or whoever, the queen that would have been,
the cousin of the brother of the sister of the guy.
There's going to be a lot of that, placing the pins with the yarn running between them of who is who.
It doesn't help that they're all Targaryens, too, so all of the names are going to be like Rhaenor and Tariel and crap like that. It's not just like Sam and Dean,
No Bran.
The one with the white hair? That one?
You mean like Ned?
The guy who used to be Doctor Who?
Right.
Oh,
well,
Matt
that's a good transition, Gary. Let's talk about the Matt Smith of it all, because he's one of the bigger names that is part of this, and he's an actor that I find to be intriguing just because he looks so distinct. I unfortunately last saw him in Morbius. He's the villain in that, but he was also in Last Night in Soho, and then, of course, of all the going back that I do watching old episodes of Doctor Who that he's in. Just kidding, because I'm not a giant freaking nerd over here watching Doctor Who.
Wow.
Doctor Who's great.
Oh, man, you're not a giant nerd. Let's talk about the Game of Thrones finale that aired about an hour ago.
Go buy another collector's edition DVD, you dork.
Touche. I going into this knew Matt Smith was going to be in it, and I almost thought maybe he would be, Sean Bean was the big name going into Game of Thrones. There's a lot of established actors in that show, but he was kind of the big name, and of course he dies at the, spoilers, at the end of season 1. So I was kind of thinking, is Matt Smith going to be the name that they have here to help establish what we've seen? It seems like he's going to be somebody they're going to keep around for a while to cause some chaos here. So I was pleasantly surprised with that.
So, again, having no expectations of this show, not really watching the trailer, I thought that Matt Smith was just going to be in it, right? And I didn't really know what he was going to do. And I like Matt Smith from what I've seen him in, but I was afraid he was going to be boring. He was not boring. Boring is not the word I would use to describe Matt Smith's character.
No.
He was great. He's phenomenal. He's dynamic. He's the kind of character who I think is going to stick around because you want him to die. I think he'll be, just continually plaguing everyone right up until the end. He's the kind of character who I can see almost doing like a Jaime Lannister type of story arc where you hate him in the beginning and then by the end there's some sort of redemption. You don't hate him. And then he dies anyways before he really has a chance to be a hero.
See, sorry. So Matt Smith, I thought you did a great job. I love Matt Smith. He, upon like my third watching of Doctor Who, I think he might actually be my favorite. But it was uncomfortable watching him have doggy style sex. I was like, Doctor Who, no. But I thought he was a great villain. Honestly, I didn't hate him. I didn't hate him. Like,
you know how many people were probably like, Doctor Who, yes!
I was like, no, not my doctor.
So many people have just wanted to see that their entire lives. There's so many Doctor Who.
Doctor Who spreading cheeks
by that scene.
Hey, but this is a Game of Thrones spinoff. You know, we knew what we were signing up for.
Yeah, if you're not spreading cheeks, are you even Game of Thrones? But yeah,
that's another thing Annie said. My wife, as she was like, "There's the nudity. Guess it's still Game of Thrones."
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot.
Besides sitting around a council, yeah, you do have to have some nudity and gratuitous violence. But again, they checked all the boxes.
But yeah, so I don't know. I didn't really get to the point where I hated him. I kind of felt, I don't know. I felt for him a bit because it almost seemed, I'm not sure if this is true, but it almost seemed like he was actually like there and had his brother's back a bit. It kind of seemed like he got the short end of the stick towards the end a little bit. Not completely, because he was a dick. He was a huge dick, and I could see him being a bad king.
I think he's got some of that Targaryen madness.
He definitely does, but it wasn't to the point where I hated it. Like Daenerys' brother, that guy was annoying. And Joffrey was also fucking annoying. Those, you know what I mean? Oh, wait, Joffrey he wasn't a Targaryen.
But he was annoying.
But he was annoying and mad. Yeah, he wasn't that kind of crazy, I guess is my point. He wasn't, like, unhinged, to the point where you can't relate to him, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I mean, he went out and definitely massacred the people, but the people were all criminals. It was just his way of... he was definitely swinging his big dick, and it was definitely violent, but... Maybe he's not a bad guy, but just to me, that shows a touch of madness.
I mean, that scene, you can't go around cutting off wings, like, on a whim and not be crazy.
Yeah, he can. So, to me, he's got, like, big-time Nazi vibes, you know? That's his private military, his private army, kicking in doors, cutting off people's dicks because of alleged crimes that he was the judge of that day. So I think he's got a touch of the madness.
Well, there was a shot in the show that stuck out to me that I thought was actually pretty incredible, and it's during the jousting scene that's simultaneously with the Queen giving birth and going through all that.
It's a great scene, yeah.
That led up to her death. And there's a part where I think they start to get the baby out of her, for lack of better terms to use. And then it cuts to it's Prince Daemon Targaryen, Matt Smith's character, as he gets essentially knocked off his horse, but he slides on his back along the rail that separates the two lanes of horses, and it looked like he had a gleeful smile on his face, like as if he was enjoying this, you know, the ride that he was on there. And I was like, this to me perfectly defines the character. And then the way they were syncing up the action of those two kind of terrifying scenes was pretty incredible, I thought, from an editing and storytelling perspective. So there were some scenes like that. I thought that he got some of the best moments. Also, you know, we could talk about Matt Smith's look all day, but just his different dragon helmets, one from the captain of the town watch, whatever you call it, the city watch, the helmet he was wearing then, the helmet that he was wearing during all the jousting scenes. Man, they're giving this guy some incredible helmets that really showcase how incredible his face looks.
His armor was badass every time. Yeah, he looked dope.
His armor was definitely badass. I think those helmets hinged on video game dragon, which, if for better or worse, they were definitely iconic. But I thought, you know, a little cheesy. But I thought the wolf helmet was a little cheesy, too.
It definitely did look like the final armor that you could unlock in, like, a Dragon Age video game.
Yeah, that's fair.
Absolutely.
But, you know, he is a prince, so of course he has boss armor.
Yeah, it was gaudy as fuck.
Yeah, if anybody's going to have it, that's the guy. There was a part early in Season 1 of Game of Thrones where if Littlefinger had been killed, everyone would have been okay. Basically everyone, except for Bobby B. He still would have died pretty early on. He got poisoned and whatnot. In this show, in the new Game of Thrones, in that jousting fight, when when Daemon goes down and the other knight is over him with the flail,
Coleman.
and Daemon barely yields. Barely. You can see him thinking about it. That was the moment when I was like, if you smashed in Daemon's face right now, this show wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Like this would be the moment. This would be the guy who could have ended it all before it started. And he had too much honor, and he didn't. And I'm not sure Daemon would have done the same for him if the shoe would have been switched. It was just a funny moment for me. It stuck out. It was a real, like, ding, here's a trigger moment. Like, this is really important. He could have killed Daemon right here.
Yeah. Yeah, the show wouldn't have happened moment was when the baby, I mean, we're talking spoilers, when the baby didn't make it, and they have him on separate, because I didn't realize the baby didn't make it until I saw the second pyre with the baby
right,
on
I think that I didn't know either, and you see that and you go, oh no.
Oh shit, yeah. And I was like, oh, I guess this is why there's going to be a show. Otherwise it would just be a simple matter of normal succession, and no one wants to watch that.
Which again, talking about a storytelling perspective, one of the things I thought that they did so well in setting this up as the first episode is that they did such a good job of creating a sense of urgency in subtle ways. Early on, you see the king, Viserys, has that wound on his back that's not healing, which, of course, that to me is huge foreshadowing of something that could, an infected wound that's not healing probably be the death of him. And then you see him put in a situation where, not only does his wife not survive, but his son, the heir, also doesn't survive. And so now all of a sudden there's a sense of urgency of like, what's going to happen? Now you see this guy who's literally, his life is a ticking clock of when it could potentially end. And they got to figure something out, or else crazy old Prince Daemon Targaryen Matt Smith is going to be taken over.
Yeah.
And it's very clear up front you don't want that to happen. So I thought they did a great job of really getting you invested in creating that sense of urgency of like, okay, they got to figure something out here. Don't want this guy to be in charge.
They said a lot of that in the meetings, in the council meetings, when everyone was like fighting over the throne, and like, you have to pick somebody or else like this is just going to be a bloodbath. And I'm not sure. I feel like they knew about grayscale at this point in the timeline, so I'm not sure if that's what it was, but it looked like he had grayscale, and I'm not sure.
It did look like the starting of grayscale. I thought the same thing, but I'm also not sure.
But I thought it was... Did I hear correctly that that wound came from one of the swords that makes up the Iron Throne?
He said, I'm sure it's just a wound from the throne.
Okay. Well,
but I don't think he was sure.
Because later you see him with blood on his fingers as if he's nicked himself on the seat there too.
Yeah.
Bringing multiple meanings to when he says it's the most dangerous throne in the land to sit upon, both literally and figuratively.
Knife chair! Yeah, it's pretty dangerous.
Well, and speaking of sitting around the table and there, I want to talk a little bit about Sir Otto Hightower, which is the Hand of the King, played by Rhys Ifans in the show, which I was pretty sure I had seen he was in the show, but as I'm watching, I'm like kind of trying to figure out who he was, and the whole time I was like, is that him? Rhys Ifans, obviously a famous character actor, who is one who can totally disguise himself and really looks like himself. He played Kurt Connors, the Lizard, in the Amazing Spider-Man movies and in No Way Home. He was Xenophilius Lovegood in the latter Harry Potter movies.
Oh, wow.
He's very well known for a scene in Notting Hill, old romantic comedy. Dude's been around for a while and just always kind of playing crazy characters. And here, as the Hand of the King, playing like a more normal character, but who also seems like he has a lot of nuances to him. He's one of the characters at first you meet that you seem like has a lot of good in him and really does want what's best for the king. But as we know in Game of Thrones, everybody always has their own agenda, and even seeing him sending his own daughter up to comfort the king and potentially see her, become the new queen and have his bloodline inserted there. Everybody has their own motives, no matter how good a character may seem.
That whole thing made me very uncomfortable. when he sent
Absolutely.
her. But yeah, I really like the Hightower thing because they're not in Game of Thrones. You don't hear anything about the Hightowers, and so it's like,
Mhm.
what's going to happen in the next 100? You know, like, is this it? Are we about to watch them die? And that's a lot of the stuff I'm interested in seeing too, like where the houses were. It's interesting the Baratheons are in it. You hear names like that. Like I said, you don't need to have seen Game of Thrones at all, but you are rewarded with like, oh, cool, that's where this house is. You know, you see Rickon Stark at the end, and that kind of stuff.
Because in Game of Thrones, they're all alluding to their family lines, and this has been done for generations and generations, and now here we are seeing those old generations. So yeah, I have an appreciation for that.
So I thought it was cool that the storyline in Game of Thrones, the first one, there's an undead army coming and there's a dragon army coming. Those are pretty huge end of world events storming your way. And then they sort of both happen, right? That's what the whole thing's about. In this version, in the new one, who they chose, they didn't choose the female. And now, by the end of the first episode, again, it's almost this urgent battle over who the heir is going to be. So they kind of set the same story into motion twice. So we really understood how important this heir fight is going to be. Because just passing along an heir doesn't seem like such a critical, crucial thing. So they did a good job showing us in the beginning and then reestablishing throughout the episode of why this could be almost a world-ending event, or at least a King's Landing ending event, or a Targaryen ending event. So this is a big deal without being an undead horde or a dragon army.
Yeah.
And you wonder how you're gonna keep those high stakes in a show like this. And I think they did a good job. I think they did a good job keeping high stakes. And on the talk of the heirs, I think by the end of this episode, I'm looking at the queen who was. She might be making a play for the throne by the end of the series. Daemon could be making a play for the throne by the end of the series, and then of course the female lead, the princess, she is to be the next heir. And I thought her performance, we haven't talked about her yet. I thought she totally killed it.
Crushed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna turn to the lead for better or for worse. Even though there are a lot of characters, it does seem like the show's kind of on her shoulders in a way, if that makes
She's
sense.
sort of our Daenerys and Sansa rolled into one.
Yeah, and I thought she was very good. She had she's young, but also the way that she handled her dialogue and like snappy responses, it seems like she's got a lot going on as an actress. Like I think she was very good.
She was very regal. She was like absolutely royalty. No question in it. I loved it. I thought she was great. It's funny that she's like Arya. She wants to be a knight, that kind of thing. She has this whole thing foist upon her at the end. That whole scene at the end when they're in the room with the dragon's head and he tells her like, what do you see and all that. That was a cool conversation. And during that, I mean, that was really cool that he like passed on the secret to the heir, and it's like, hey, like, this shit's not fake. Like, there are gonna be, just so you know, if you don't maintain a strong kingdom, the undead will kill everybody. And like, it's funny to think about because obviously the interesting thing, because it was lost like right before it became relevant, which is really funny. But
yeah, Jaime Lannister did it off camera right before it started.
Jaime Lannister doomed us all.
What's your background? I killed the king. Like, oh, okay, great.
Like, you see the show, you watch the character, but like from like a role playing point of view, like making a character, that's such a great backstory. Oh yeah, I killed the king, but like it's cool now. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, but my daddy's rich, so it's okay.
Did you all find yourself when watching this kind of having to reset your mind to get back into Game of Thrones? Like, Jahan, you've already alluded to this and some of the things that are like kind of gross or uncomfortable when you're watching, but you're like, that's also just Game of Thrones. Where there's the technical stuff. I'm like, okay, yeah, so there's the king, and then there's the hand of the king, and the king's guard, and the Meisters, and all that. I'm kind of had to get myself back into the structure of how their kingdom is set up, but then there's also like, yeah, the sex and the violence and all of that, and these old men taking on their young queens, and so that they can have heirs and all that. Like, I had to mentally get myself back in the flow of just of Westeros, for that matter.
So Jen recently did a watch of Game of Thrones, so like I've seen it recently, but all gratuitous sex scenes in every show that I watch is 10 times worse when I'm watching with my parents, which I was watching with both of my parents, and then here's Matt Smith doing doggy style for an absurd amount of time. That went on for a long time, and it was very like, spankings. Like, it was graphic, and I'm like, man, my dad's right there. Like, this is really awkward. But, yeah.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Yeah. I don't know. But just everything. I feel like they did a great job of not overloading with story and exposition. Like, it did just enough while also having the things that I think could ease us back into it. The jousting, the big celebrations, just being back in King's Landing. There are parts where they walked through a section where I thought, oh, that's where Cersei and them had their big map on the ground, and where they would be planning their battles, and like in this, it's just a common throughout, and almost did seem like a civilization that works together, or just works in general. Whereas in Game of Thrones, it's always kind of in a state of disarray, or just the people that live in King's Landing are just straight up awful poverty and just living in terrible states. And in this, it was interesting to go back and see it all functioning.
To be fair, we did witness like 100 of them lose hands and bollocks without a trial.
Those were all the bad guys. Those
supposedly.
Were all the thieves.
No trial, no due process. Give me your hand. No one's going to bandage your arm. I don't know. That's kind of dystopian. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It did seem to be a better off King's Landing for sure. And they even talk about how it had been on the decline since one of the queens had died or something. And Matt Smith was kind of restoring it to glory. Like,
I feel like that's the kind of cool thing about King's Landing is we watched it decline even in Game of Thrones, right? We watched it go through this like religious apocalypse of authoritarian rule where the religion rose up against the crown. And so, yeah, King's Landing has just been on the decline for like 200 years. So now we get to see this different version where instead of religious zealots, it's just like this criminal underground, this criminal den. And that alone could lead to a lot of fun stories or even new interesting characters.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I'm looking, I don't know how much more I really even have to say about it. Like, I really liked it. I liked seeing the dragons again. I thought the CG of the dragons looked
great.
I do have a question for y'all. Regarding the princess, the main character. I think it's Rhaenyra, if I'm pronouncing it right.
I think so.
Who was named the heir at the end. Her friend, I guess, her close friend, who's
Hightower's daughter.
Yes, Lady Hightower.
Alicent.
Are they?
Her name's Alicent.
Are they
Alicent.
just?
It is. That's her name.
Really. There was times where I was getting mixed signals in one of their first scenes together, where I couldn't tell if they are just really, really close friends.
They seem like they might be into each other.
Okay, like they might have a little bit more than friendship there.
The princess definitely feels like she might be into it.
So even Lady Hightower, I thought, I definitely agree. I thought that she was flirty with the princess, and then of course she goes to hit on the king, and then I thought even whenever she gave Daemon her prize, whenever he brought his lance over, she was like really into Daemon. I was like, oh, is she supposed to marry him? Like, that was my next question. I was like, oh, is she gonna, like...
Yeah, she did give it her favor to him, yeah.
Yeah, first I was like, oh, the girls are together. Then it was the favor, and I was like, oh, no, she's into him on the down low, but he's already married.
But then
and then she goes to the king. So I think maybe she's just that kind of consort.
Maybe, but also, like... And then the princess gave her favor to Coleman, who was a lowborn son, because she was, and a Dornishman apparently, which is interesting. And I feel like there's some crossover with Targaryens and the Dornish at some point in history too. So this might be it. But also, I wouldn't call what she did with the king going to flirt so much as being sent to be molested by. If it just semantically, I feel like I don't think she wanted to go.
Maybe the terminology was she was sent to comfort him. Let's go with that.
Okay.
And, yeah, you can extract that how you please. But
I hated it. I was very upset.
She did not seem like that was the first time she had been commanded to do such a thing.
No.
I did think I liked the, obviously Daemon and Hightower, the Hand, are rivals in a sense, and you could see that by him choosing. Daemon chose
his son,
Hightower's son, to be his first jousting opponent, and then I saw him as seeking the daughter's favor as also just being like a slap to Hightower.
Fair.
So
That's
just
fair.
all of those mind games that he's playing early on lets you know that Daemon, no matter how crazy or unhinged he may be, he's smart and he has a plan.
He is certainly sharp. Yeah.
I also enjoy the fact that the king and queen in the beginning, before the birthing, obviously, they're both clearly Targaryens before marriage. So,
well, that's always been the thing. Right?
Yeah,
the Targaryens always married within their own blood to make sure that the lineage was pure. So that was always a thing.
It's very upsetting, but yeah, I mean, it's true.
Daemon is the brother of the king, right?
The brother of the king.
I thought whenever he gave the princess the necklace, that, she was like, the king doesn't know he's here yet, right? And she went to like talk to him one-on-one, and they kind of had a moment. It wasn't like real flirty, it wasn't real sexual, but he's not real cool with a lot of people, and he seems to be cool with her. He also referred to the way he referred to her mom was kind of like playful and fun. Like he almost liked them more than he even likes his own brother. And who knows how he's related to that mom, because that could have been his sister also. It's, they're all Targaryens.
Yeah, I mean, they really keep it in the family, and it's gross.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see, a non-relationship bloom between the two of them. Yeah, I think that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, all in all, man, you got the callbacks like the Valyrian steel sword, Weeping Sister or whatever.
You got dragons, you got violence, you got incest, you got incest.
Incest, dragons, and blood. It's Game of Thrones. It's back, and it's good.
Yeah, it was good. I'm looking
certified
forward to the
fresh.
Next one. I'm looking forward to it being, the water cooler discussion. I've said it before, when they announced the show, I was like, I don't need more Game of Thrones. But now that it's here and that I enjoyed the premiere as much as I did, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm here for it. I'm here for more Game of Thrones.
So here's the big question: what do you guys think? We still have Lord of the Rings coming out at some point. So we're gonna have. What do you think? What are you guys thinking? What do you foresee in the future of fantasy entertainment? You have any gut feelings?
This is good, man. I don't know. So
it's a good time to be alive. First of all,
it is a good time to be a nerd. I don't think Lord of the Rings is going to have anywhere near as much nudity, sex. Definitely not as much incest, which I guess isn't a deal breaker. But it's just, I don't know, man. It's
just like Game of Thrones without the incest. I'm not watching.
I'm not watching. Alabama just collectively turns off their TVs. But yeah, I mean, it's apples and oranges if you ask me.
Yeah, it's tough because they're both, in quotes, fantasy, so it's easy to lump them in. And heck, I've been doing it for a while. I mean, the fact that these shows are coming out essentially around the same time against each other, I think isn't a coincidence. I think that that's on purpose as a competitive move. Now, that being said, Game of Thrones has been a big part of my life for the last 10 years. It's a show I've been consistently watching. But Lord of the Rings has a lot more nostalgia for me as far as reading the books and watching the movies back when they came out, 20
Playing
years
all the
ago.
video games, man. We've had 20 years worth of great Lord of the Rings games,
Yeah.
arguably better than the movies.
Yeah, it's actually a shame we haven't had more considering how big that franchise is. And yeah, so I'm very excited for I'm probably more excited for Lord of the Rings starting than I was for House of the Dragon. But that being said, I had more confidence that House of the Dragon would be good, just as what it is, than with Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, I'm still almost a little nervous about it, although I've seen some early buzz that the episodes are good. So of Lord of the Rings. So we'll have to see. I like I said, easy to lump them both in together as fantasy, but Lord of the Rings, you're getting dwarves and elves and hobbits and things like that you don't really get in Game of Thrones.
I do wish Game of Thrones had some more fantasy species and things like that going on, but it does have, the elves, the children of the woods, and now that we're back in time, there's a better chance that we get to see them as we move along. We did see the tree with the face in the courtyard. I don't know if you guys caught that, but it's there. It's happening still, so we may get a little bit more fantasy sprinkled on it this time. I agree with you. I love dwarves. You know what I mean? I love a dwarven fantasy and magic. And we'll see if Lord of the Rings goes with some fireballs.
Orcs. There's
Yeah,
gonna be
man,
lots of orcs.
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I don't remember who was the one that chopped down that tree in King's Landing, but somebody did before Game of Thrones. No.
Yeah, so there's going to be a reason they chop it down, right? And maybe we'll get to see.
Maybe we're
why,
gonna see
and
it.
I'm sure it has something to do with the elves and magic.
I hope it's just like it obstructs someone's view of like the brothel. And they're like, get it out of here.
I'm the new arborist that the city hired, and that tree's too old. It's a danger to the foundation, and we're gonna have to take it down.
I don't like the looks of them roots. Gotta have to go.
Season 2 is like King's Landing versus the HOA.
King's Landing versus the insurance salesman.
So House of the Dragon, at least as far as episode 1 is concerned, which is officially called The Heirs of the Dragon, is the title of the first episode. I think clearly it's certified fresh out the box.
Yeah.
So that being said, Gary and I have been itching to talk about The Rehearsal, the new HBO show, Nathan Fielder show. However, we're strapped for time, so I do want to save that conversation for when we can dive into it a little bit more in detail. However, we got about 5 minutes here to play around real quick. Let's talk about the other premiere that happened earlier this week. On Disney Plus, we got She-Hulk Attorney at Law. The first episode premiered. We don't have to do an hour on this by any means, but I am curious to hear some quick thoughts from each of you about what you thought about She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Jahan, we will start with you.
I mean, it's a great show. It's a feminist show. It has female writers, and it shows in just the portrayal of women not being written by men. I love She-Hulk as a character personally. I always have. And if you don't know, she's the current Hulk on the Avengers team. But I thought it was great. I loved watching her master her powers. I thought that her and Bruce had really good chemistry. Like, they seemed like they cared about each other and were cousins. Like, you could tell that they were family. And I really liked it. And it had the greatest end credit scene of all time. I was dying.
I didn't see the end credit scene, so I can't speak on that.
You skipped it?
I didn't skip it. It's after the credits. I didn't wait for it.
Oh, it was worth it. It was worth the wait.
Maybe I'll go back and check it out when I watch episode 2.
It was
Gary,
hilarious. But yeah.
Gary, what did you think of She-Hulk?
So I did not read She-Hulk. I don't read She-Hulk, not one of my favorite characters or books. And I thought the show was corny. I thought a lot of the jokes were corny. I thought the CG looked pretty bad. I hate Bruce Banner Hulk mix. I hate that character.
You do. Yeah.
It was like watching it was like watching a third character. It was not like watching Banner or any of the Hulks that I've become accustomed to over the years of Marvel. It was like watching a new, not funny third character whose jokes didn't land, who thought he was real funny. It was just like a real painful watch for me. I was able to make it through the whole episode, but I did not enjoy it. But now that it's going, now that they can start the attorney show part of things, I'm a little bit more interested. Uh, I know that like the She-Hulk books are a little corny and a little silly and a little funny, and they break the fourth wall. But to me, that's the kind of stuff that killed comics in like the late '80s and '90s and kind of tanked them and crushed them before books like X-Men came back around and started trying to get stuff serious again. And then, of course, they got corny and tanked. And then Ultimate Universe comes back around and tries to get serious again. When this corny stuff comes around, I think it's bad. I think it's bad for the whole industry. But we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the premiere. I talk about going into something with little to no expectations. I kind of was like that, and I did enjoy it. When things start with breaking the fourth wall, I'm not a fan of breaking the fourth wall in general. I think that there are times where it's done, and I do enjoy it. An example is actually the recent Winning Time series on HBO did some breaking the fourth wall, and John C. Reilly was actually pretty natural at doing that, and I thought it worked. And in this, it wasn't overused, so it was fine, and it wasn't like outright bad or anything. But just when things do it off the bat, I'm like, am I gonna like this? That being said, I thought some of the humor landed all right. I can understand your complaints about the Hulk, Gary, because yeah, it's not the classic Hulk, right? It's not the I'm Banner smart, I'm Hulk mean. It's the weird mix-up that almost seems like a cheat code in the MCU. That being said, I'm not under the impression he's really going to be in it much beyond this pilot. I think that it looked to me like Banner's probably in it for the exposition and getting her set up, and I don't think he's going to be in it much more, except maybe to provide some assistance as needed, like over the phone or over Zoom or something, whatever it may be.
Maybe he'll have scenes but not directly interact with her. I completely get that same impression.
Yeah, but I'm with you. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes more as a legal comedy of a female lawyer who's also a Hulk trying to navigate her job as a lawyer and also navigating dating and everyday life. Like that to me, I do think there's some appeal there as being something funny and like a little bit more chill, I guess. Like I obviously wasn't a huge fan of Moon Knight. I liked some of Miss Marvel. Like I was really high on it when it started, and I thought it was a little bit dragged out, and they really tried to make it like this huge sprawling story that I thought got a little bit beyond the control of the show.
Yeah.
I think that She-Hulk looks like it's going to be a little bit more contained and maybe a little more chill. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, we've got more to look forward to. We know Wong's going to be in the show. We know Daredevil's going to be in the show. We know Abomination's gonna be back, Tim Roth. So
what was the after credits scene, Jahan?
So like during the whole show, like she's subtly like being like talking about Captain America, and because they bring up Captain America, they bring up Tony Stark, and like it's cool to hear them talk about them. You get a little bit more of those characters that are gone, but she's speculating on like him being a virgin, and like she's doing math. And like she's like, so he never had blah blah blah. But at the end credit scene, they're back at the bar, at the Hulk's bar that he has in his bodega or whatever. And she's in her human form, and she's really drunk, and she's like slurring her speech, and she's like crying, and she's like, did you see that ass? That ass didn't deserve to die and like she was just like lamenting the fact that Captain America never had sex. And finally, Bruce was like, Captain America lost his virginity at an OSO, one of those shows.
In 1940
1943.
This tour, he lost his virginity.
And then she sobered up and was like, yeah, I knew it! And he was like, you're not really drunk? She's like, no! And she's like, and then she's like, Captain America, full! And then it cuts out because she was just cheering that he had sex. And it was really funny. I thought it was good.
I watched She-Hulk with my wife, and would you like to know what her biggest hang-up about the whole show was?
Yes.
which is why whenever Jennifer Walters hulks out, does her hair grow? That was the thing.
I've heard that.
My wife
I've heard
couldn't get past.
I have also heard that from other people. Yeah,
I think
I don't have
the
a good
short answer to that is going to be CG. I think they had such a hard time trying to figure out how to make the hair look good in CG that they just kept changing it and making it longer and changing haircuts and doing everything they could until they tried to make the hair as decent as they could. I think the CG is going to be one of those things that we look back in 10 years and you guys are going to be like, holy crap, that was bad. And I'll be like, yeah,
it's not the best.
Yeah, my justification for it looks like CG in a TV show. And ultimately that's what it is a TV show. And I will say I thought it looked better than especially the earliest trailer.
Yeah,
it looked much better than that.
If you want to say it's a TV show, let's call Game of Thrones a TV show too, because their dragons looked way better than the CG in She-Hulk.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I think that they're dumping more money into a season of Game of Thrones a year or House of the Dragon in a year than they are with the...
Probably by a lot.
This is like the seventh Marvel
show,
MCU Disney Plus series. We've gotten in like a year and a half. Yeah. So, but I understand. But I mean, it's a valid,
I get it.
Total valid.
It's streaming service versus streaming service, and maybe it's not fair to compare the budget of the shows, but it is service versus service.
She-Hulk's still hot, man. That's all I'm saying.
This is Disney Plus's current show versus HBO's current show, and I don't have to pick one. But if I did, it would be Game of Thrones. But I'll be watching both of these. I'll check back in with you guys and see how you're feeling about both.
I'll put it this way. She-Hulk is the show that, like, if I'm working from home on Thursday when the episode drops for She-Hulk, that I can watch on my lunch break while, like, eating lunch, hanging out, whatever. Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon is going to be the show that on Sunday nights I put everything aside at 8 o'clock to watch the new episode when it drops.
I also watch She-Hulk on my lunch break, but hey. I like it.
It's cool because Game of Thrones comes on at 7 o'clock here, so then I can spoil it for you guys.
That's not how that works, but okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's how time works.
Oh, shit.
That'd be cool, though.
Yeah, it would.
That'd be dope. Gary lives in the future. All right. So that's it.
This has been
Fresh Out the Podcast. Episode what?
59. Episode 59.
Nice.
I've actually got something fun planned for episode 60 that I haven't even talked to you guys about yet. But I think we're actually going to be doing an MCU draft. So there'll be more.
That sounds fun.
So there will be more on that soon. But I think that's what you can look forward to next week. But yeah, I enjoyed talking House of the Dragon with you guys. I'm glad it was good, guys. I'm glad it's good.
Me too.
I'm glad it's good.
I'm so glad it's good.
Prepared. I was totally prepared to be let down.
Game of Thrones needed something to be good after the show ended the way it did, and it is. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening to Fresh Out the Podcast, episode 59. I am the board game guru and game master extraordinaire, Johananon.